A single gunshot echoed through the empty plains of Montana Territory, 1873, as Zara Jenkins huddled beneath the upturned wagon, clutching her bleeding shoulder and praying for death to take her swiftly rather than at the hands of the bandits who had ambushed her family's caravan. The thunder of hooves had faded into the distance, carrying away the men who'd murdered her father, their laughter still ringing in her ears as they rode off with the family's meager savings, the money meant to start their new life. Her mother and younger brother had fled in the opposite direction when the attack began, but Zara had stayed behind to help her father, a decision that had earned her a bullet and left her alone with his cooling body. Night fell quickly on the prairie, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that seeped through Zara's thin dress. The blood from her wound had congealed, but the pain remained sharp, a constant reminder that she was still alive when she wished she wasn't. She could hear wolves howling in the distance, and she wondered if they would find her before the cold took her. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her press herself further into the shadows of the broken wagon. It could be the bandits returning, or perhaps some other danger lurking in the wilderness. She held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give away her position. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Anyone alive out here?" Zara remained silent, uncertain whether to trust this newcomer or fear him. A tall figure dismounted from a horse, his silhouette cutting an imposing shape against the starlit sky. He carried a lantern, its glow revealing a man in his late 20s with a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the confident grace of someone at home in the wild terrain. "I know someone's here," he said, his voice gentler now. "I followed the trail of blood. You're hurt." As the light swept closer to her hiding place, Zara realized she couldn't remain hidden. With trembling hands, she pushed herself forward, wincing at the pain that shot through her shoulder. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "just leave me be." The man crouched down, bringing the lantern closer to examine her wound. His face showed concern rather than threat, but Zara had learned today how quickly men's intentions could change. "That needs tending," he said matter-of-factly. "My cabin's not far from here. I can help you." "Why would you?" Zara asked, suspicion edging her voice. "Because you need it," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. When she didn't move, he sighed and sat back on his heels. "Name's Griffin Stanton. I run cattle about 10 miles east of here. Was tracking a mountain lion that's been taking my calves when I heard the shooting. Came too late to help, seems like." His eyes drifted to the still form of her father lying a few yards away, and his expression hardened. "Bandits?" Zara nodded, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her dirt-smudged face. "My mother and brother. They ran when the shooting started. I don't know if they're..." Her voice broke. Griffin stood and offered his hand. "First light, we'll look for them. But right now, you need tending, or you won't be any good to them if we do find them." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. The world tilted dangerously, and she stumbled against him. "I don't deserve saving," she whispered, thinking of how she'd failed to protect her father, how she'd chosen to stay when she should have fled with her mother and brother. The cowboy's reply was firm as he steadied her. "You don't get to decide that." Without further discussion, he lifted her onto his horse and mounted behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist as they rode away from the scene of carnage. Zara leaned back against his chest, too exhausted and in too much pain to resist. Griffin's cabin was simple but sturdy, nestled in a small valley with a creek running nearby. Inside, he gently set her down on a chair and lit several lamps, illuminating a tidy one-room dwelling. A fireplace dominated one wall, and he quickly built up the embers into a warming blaze. "Need to look at that shoulder," he said, retrieving a wooden box from a shelf. Zara stiffened. "I can tend to it myself." His expression was patient but unyielding. "Bullet still in there?" She hadn't thought of that. I don't know." "Then you can't tend it yourself." He opened the box, revealing an assortment of medical supplies. "Had some training as a field medic during the war. Seen worse than this." The Civil War had ended 8 years ago, which would have made him young when he served, but not unusually so. Many boys had joined up before their time. "Which side?" she asked, partly from genuine curiosity, partly to distract herself from what was coming. "Union," he replied, pouring whiskey over his hands. You? Pennsylvania. My father was too old to fight. Griffin nodded, then gestured to her bloody dress. I need to see the wound. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she knew he was right. With trembling fingers, she worked at the buttons of her dress, managing to expose her shoulder and the upper portion of her arm without revealing too much else. Griffin examined the wound with clinical detachment. Bullet went through clean. Lucky. Going to hurt like hell when I clean it, though. He was right. Zara bit down on a folded piece of leather as he poured whiskey over the wound, tears streaming down her face from the searing pain. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he stitched both the entry and exit wounds, then bandaged them carefully. Done, he said finally, wiping his hands on a cloth. You should rest now. He helped her to his bed, despite her protests that she could sleep on the floor. Too exhausted to argue further, Zara sank into the relative comfort of the straw-filled mattress, while Griffin took a blanket and settled himself near the fire. Thank you, she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. Just rest, came his quiet reply. We'll find your family tomorrow. Zara awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, bringing with them a wave of grief and pain. She sat up gingerly, her shoulder throbbing but no longer with the sharp, fiery pain of yesterday. Griffin was already awake, cooking something over the fire that filled the cabin with a savory aroma. He turned when he heard her stirring. Morning, he said. How's the shoulder? Better, she admitted, though it was still painful to move. Thank you. He nodded, accepting her gratitude without comment, and handed her a tin mug of coffee. Breakfast's almost ready. Then we'll head out to look for your family. Zara sipped the strong, bitter coffee, grateful for its warmth. I need to bury my father first. Griffin's expression softened slightly. Already done. At first light. Found a good spot on a hill overlooking the valley. Marked it proper. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you. He would have liked that view. After a simple breakfast of beans and bacon, Griffin helped Zara onto his horse again. Her dress was torn and blood-stained, but it was all she had. He'd given her one of his shirts to wear over it, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to fit her smaller frame. They rode back to the site of the attack, where Griffin carefully examined the ground. 2 sets of tracks heading north, he said, pointing to barely visible impressions in the hard soil. Small ones. Could be your mother and brother. Hope flared in Zara's chest. Can we follow them? That's the plan. He mounted behind her, and they set off, following the faint trail. As they rode, Zara told him about her family. How her father, a carpenter by trade, had decided to seek a new life in the West after his workshop in Philadelphia had been destroyed in a fire. How her mother, Hannah, had been reluctant to leave their home, but had finally agreed for the sake of 12-year-old Simon, who'd been having trouble with some local boys. What about you? Griffin asked. Were you eager for adventure in the West? Zara gave a hollow laugh. Hardly. I was engaged to be married. My fiancé, Thomas, was a clerk at a law office. He wasn't pleased about my family's decision to move west. We parted ways. Griffin was quiet for a moment. His loss. The trail led them to a small creek where the tracks became more distinct in the softer mud. It was clear that Zara's mother and brother had followed the water for some distance before heading towards a distant line of trees. Smart, Griffin commented. Water for drinking, and those trees will provide shelter. They reached the grove by midday. It was a small oasis of cottonwoods in the otherwise open prairie, providing welcome shade from the increasingly hot sun. Hello, Zara called out, her voice cracking with hope and fear. Mother? Simon? It's Zara. Silence greeted her call, then a rustling from the undergrowth. Griffin's hand moved to his holstered revolver, but before he could draw it, a small figure burst from the bushes. Zara, Simon cried, running toward her with tears streaming down his face. You're alive. Zara practically fell from the horse in her haste to embrace her brother, ignoring the pain in her shoulder as she wrapped her arms around him. Where's Mother? She asked, looking over his head. Simon's face crumpled. She twisted her ankle when we were running. She hid me here and went to try to find help. She said she'd be back by nightfall, but she never came. Zara's heart sank. When was this, Simon? Yesterday afternoon, he replied, his voice small. I was too scared to leave. Griffin dismounted and crouched beside the boy. You did right, staying put. Makes it easier for folks to find you. He glanced at Zara. We'll find her too. They left Simon at the grove with strict instructions to stay hidden, promising to return before dark. Griffin helped Zara back onto the horse, and they followed the new set of tracks leading away from the trees. The trail led them to a small settlement a few miles away, little more than a collection of rough buildings clustered around a crossroads. A weathered sign proclaimed it as Riverside, though there was no river in sight. Small trading post, Griffin explained. Mostly trappers and the occasional prospector passing through. They checked first at the only establishment that could generously be called a saloon. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. A few men looked up as they entered, their gazes lingering on Zara in a way that made her move closer to Griffin. The barkeeper, a heavy-set man with a scarred face, shook his head when they asked about Hannah Jenkins. Ain't seen no woman matching that description. But you might try Doc Wilson's place. He tends to find the strays. Doc Wilson's place turned out to be a small cabin at the edge of the settlement, distinguished from its neighbors only by a faded red cross painted on the door. A bell jangled as they entered, and an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from a book. Well now, he said, closing the volume. What brings you folks to my door? Zara stepped forward eagerly. I'm looking for my mother, Hannah Jenkins. She's in her 40s, brown hair streaked with gray, blue eyes. She might have injured her ankle. The doctor's expression turned grave. She's here, miss. Found her collapsed on the trail about a mile out yesterday evening. Brought her back, but... He hesitated. But what? Zara demanded, fear clutching at her heart. It's not just her ankle. She took a bullet in the back. Must have happened during whatever trouble you folks ran into. She didn't mention it, just kept going on determination, I reckon. By the time I found her, infection had set in something fierce. Zara felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. Griffin's steady hand on her elbow was the only thing keeping her upright. Is she? She couldn't finish the question. She's alive, Dr. Wilson assured her. But she's in a bad way. Through that door. Zara rushed into the adjoining room, where her mother lay on a narrow bed, her face flushed with fever. Hannah's eyes fluttered open at the sound of movement, focusing with difficulty on Zara's face. My girl, she whispered, a weak smile touching her lips. You're alive. Zara knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's hot hand in her own. Yes, and Simon too. He's safe. We've come to take you home. A shadow crossed Hannah's face. Your father? Zara couldn't speak, just shook her head slightly. Her mother closed her eyes briefly, a tear sliding down her temple. I feared as much when the shooting started. Oh, my poor John. Griffin had followed Zara into the room and now stood respectfully near the door, hat in hand. Dr. Wilson joined them, his expression serious. She needs more care than I can give her here, he said quietly. The bullet's still in there, and I don't have the skills to remove it safely. She needs a proper hospital. Where? Zara asked, desperation in her voice. Helena's the closest with decent medical facilities. For days hard riding from here. Zara looked at her mother's pale face, the sweat beading on her brow, and knew that Hannah wouldn't survive 4 days of travel in her condition. Griffin stepped forward. The railroad passes through Bitter Creek, 2 days east of here. They could take her the rest of the way by train. Dr. Wilson nodded slowly. That might work. If you leave at first light tomorrow, push hard. We leave now, Zara insisted. Every hour matters. The doctor looked like he might argue, then nodded. I'll give you laudanum for the pain and powders for the fever. Keep the wound clean as you can. Within an hour, they had arranged for a wagon from the trading post, padded with blankets to make Hannah as comfortable as possible. They collected Simon from the grove, the boy's face crumpling with tears when he saw his mother's condition. Griffin rode beside the wagon as Zara drove, setting a pace that was as fast as Hannah could tolerate. They traveled until well after dark, making camp only when Hannah's pain became too great to continue. As Zara tended to her mother, Griffin built a fire and prepared a simple meal for them. Simon sat close to the flames, his young face solemn and frightened. Your mother's strong, Griffin told him quietly, and your sister's determined. That's a powerful combination. Simon looked up at the tall cowboy. Are you going to stay with us? Griffin hesitated. I'll see you safely to Bitter Creek. And then, the boy pressed. Then you'll board the train to Helena, and the doctors there will help your mother. But what about you? Griffin didn't answer, just ruffled the boy's hair and stood to check on the horses. Later, after Simon had fallen asleep and Hannah was resting as comfortably as possible under the circumstances, Zara joined Griffin by the fire. Thank you, she said softly. We wouldn't have survived without your help. He shrugged, poking at the embers with a stick. Anyone would have done the same. No, Zara contradicted him. They wouldn't have. Most would have ridden past, or worse. She studied his profile in the flickering light. Why did you stop? Really? Griffin was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. During the war, he finally said, I was separated from my unit after Antietam. Wounded. A family took me in Southerners, mind you. They had every reason to let me die, or turn me over to the Confederate forces. Instead, they hid me, nursed me back to health. Never asked for anything in return. He looked up at her. I swore then that if I ever found someone in need, I'd do the same. Simple as that. Zara nodded, understanding. What happened to them? The family. A shadow crossed his face. Farm was burned during Sherman's march. They didn't make it out. I'm sorry, she said softly. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard traveling. The next day proved Griffin right. The terrain grew rougher as they pushed eastward, and Hannah's condition worsened despite the medicine Dr. Wilson had provided. By midday, she was delirious with fever, calling out for her husband and mistaking Zara for someone named Elizabeth, her own mother, Zara realized with a pang. They stopped more frequently to give Hannah water and to change the dressings on her wound, which was angry and inflamed despite their best efforts to keep it clean. Each time they halted, Zara could see the worry deepening in Griffin's eyes, though he said nothing to discourage her. As dusk approached on the second day, Griffin rode ahead to scout the path. He returned with a grim expression. Rivers flooded the usual crossing, he reported. Recent rains must have swelled it. We'll have to go north to the bridge. How far? Zara asked, already calculating the delay. 10 miles, maybe 12. Adds half a day to our journey. Hannah moaned from the wagon, and Zara bit her lip in frustration. She might not have half a day. Griffin studied the darkening sky. We could push through the night. Then that's what we'll do, Zara decided. Traveling by night was slow and treacherous. Griffin rode ahead with a lantern, illuminating the safest path for the wagon. Simon had finally succumbed to exhaustion and slept curled against his mother, while Zara fought to keep her own eyes open as she guided the horses. Around midnight, they reached the bridge, a sturdy wooden structure spanning a rushing river that gleamed silver in the moonlight. As they started across, a loud crack split the night air, and the wagon lurched suddenly. Wheels broken, Zara called out, fighting to control the startled horses. Griffin dismounted and hurried to assess the damage. Axles cracked too. Wagon's not going any further tonight. Despair washed over Zara. They were still at least a day's journey from Bitter Creek, and her mother was fading rapidly. What do we do? Griffin was already unhitching the team. We ride. Your mother on my horse with me. You take Simon on the other. We travel light, move fast. It took them nearly an hour to secure what few supplies they could carry and arrange Hannah as comfortably as possible in front of Griffin on his horse. She was barely conscious now, her breathing shallow and rapid. They rode through the remainder of the night, stopping only when absolutely necessary. As dawn broke, Zara could see the toll the journey was taking on her mother. Hannah's skin had a gray cast to it, and her lips were tinged with blue. Griffin, Zara called out, her voice breaking. We need to stop. She can't. He reined in his horse, carefully supporting Hannah's limp form. After examining her, his face took on a grim set. There's a homestead not far from here. I passed it on my way to find you. The family might be able to help. The homestead turned out to be little more than a sod house with a small barn, but smoke rose from the chimney, indicating it was occupied. An older man came out at their approach, rifle in hand, until he recognized Griffin. Stanton? That you? What in tarnation? Need help, Mr. Olson? Griffin interrupted. Woman's been shot. Badly infected. The man lowered his weapon and called over his shoulder. Martha, get the bed ready. Got wounded folk here. Mrs. Olson, a stout woman with kind eyes, took one look at Hannah and ushered them inside, where she and Zara carefully transferred Hannah to a clean bed. The older woman examined the wound with practiced hands. "Bullets got to come out," she said grimly. "I've done it before, during the war when the hospital was overflowing. But I won't lie to you, girl, she's mighty weak." Zara clasped her mother's hand. "Do what you can, please." While Mrs. Olson prepared her instruments, boiling them in water as she'd been taught by an army surgeon, Mr. Olson took Simon outside to help with the morning chores, an attempt to distract the boy from what was happening inside. Griffin stood awkwardly in the small house, clearly unsure of his place. "I should see to the horses," he said finally. "Wait," Zara said, catching his arm. "Stay? Please. I can't do this alone." Something shifted in his expression, and he nodded once. "I'll stay." The next hour was the longest of Zara's life. Mrs. Olson worked methodically, her weathered hands steady as she extracted the bullet from Hannah's back. Griffin held Hannah down when the pain broke through her semi-conscious state, while Zara whispered encouragement and wiped her mother's brow. When it was done, Mrs. Olson applied a poultice of herbs to the wound before bandaging it tightly. "Now we wait," she said, washing blood from her hands. "She's in God's hands." Hannah didn't wake that day, or the next. Her fever continued to rage, though occasionally it would dip, giving them hope that she might be turning a corner. Zara rarely left her side, sponging her with cool water and coaxing broth between her lips when she could. Griffin stayed as well, helping Mr. Olson with repairs to the barn and chopping enough firewood to last the family through the coming winter. In the evenings, he would sit with Simon, teaching the boy to carve simple figures from wood and telling him stories of his cattle ranch. On the third night, as Zara dozed in a chair beside her mother's bed, she was startled awake by a cool hand touching hers. Hannah's eyes were open, clear and focused for the first time in days. "Zara," she whispered. "My girl." "Mother." Zara leaned forward, joy and relief flooding through her. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Weak as a newborn calf," Hannah admitted with a faint smile. "But the pain is less." Mrs. Olson, roused by their voices, came to check Hannah's fever. "It's broken," she announced with satisfaction. "The worst is past, I think." Over the next few days, Hannah slowly regained her strength. She was still far too weak to travel, but she could sit up for short periods and take solid food. Simon spent hours by her bedside, telling her about all the things Griffin had taught him. "He says I could be a decent ranch hand with some training," the boy reported proudly. "Says I have good hands for working with animals." Hannah smiled tiredly. "Does he now? And where is this paragon of Western wisdom?" "Fixing the wagon," Zara said, coming in with a tray of food. "Mr. Olson had an old one in the barn. Griffin thinks he can get it serviceable enough to take us to Bitter Creek once you're strong enough to travel." Hannah studied her daughter's face. "You've grown fond of him." Zara busied herself arranging the tray. "He saved our lives, Mother." "Of course I'm grateful." "Grateful is not what I see in your eyes when you speak of him," Hannah observed quietly. "It reminds me of how I used to look when I spoke of your father." Zara didn't answer, but a flush spread across her cheeks. That evening, she found Griffin in the barn, working by lantern light on the wagon's repaired wheel. He looked up as she entered, a question in his eyes. "Mother's fever hasn't returned," Zara reported. "Mrs. Olson thinks she'll make a full recovery, given time and proper care." Relief washed over Griffin's features. "That's good news. Best I've heard in a long while." Zara hesitated, then perched on a bale of hay near where he was working. "What will you do? Once we reach Bitter Creek, I mean." His hands stilled on the wheel. "Head back to my ranch, I suppose. Got cattle that need tending. All alone." He glanced at her, then back at his work. "Been that way for 3 years now. Since my father passed." Zara picked at a loose thread on her borrowed dress. "Seems a lonely life." "It is," he admitted after a moment. "But it's mine. Built it from nearly nothing. Not much, but it's honest work." "I think it sounds wonderful," Zara said softly. "To build something of your own. To belong somewhere." Griffin set down his tools and looked directly at her. "What about you? What will you do once your mother's recovered?" It was a question Zara had been avoiding. Their plans had centered around her father's carpentry skills, his ability to establish a business in a growing town. Without him, with Hannah's recovery likely to be long and costly, Their prospects were uncertain at best. I don't know, she admitted. We have no money, no connections out here. The bandits took everything. Griffin was quiet for a moment. My ranch needs a woman's touch, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. And a boy Simon's age could learn a lot, grow into a fine cowhand. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Are you offering us charity, Mr. Stanton? No, madam, he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm offering you a choice. Before she could respond, Simon came running into the barn. Zara, Mr. Olson says there's riders coming. A whole bunch of them. Griffin was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle propped against the wall. Stay here, he ordered, striding toward the door. Zara ignored the command, following close behind him. Outside, she could see a group of horsemen approaching the homestead, silhouetted against the setting sun. Mr. Olson stood on his porch, shotgun in hand. Army patrol, he said as Griffin joined him. Regular route through these parts. Usually friendly enough. The soldiers reined in their horses in the yard, and their leader, a young lieutenant, touched his hat in greeting. Evening, folks. Just passing through on patrol. Any trouble to report? Griffin stepped forward. As a matter of fact, there is. Family here was attacked by bandits about 5 days' ride west of here. Man killed, woman badly wounded. Took everything they had. The lieutenant's expression hardened. Descriptions? Zara came forward, ignoring Griffin's frown. 4 men. Leader had a scar across his left cheek, rode a black horse with white socks. Another had a red beard. I didn't see the others clearly. Recognition flickered in the lieutenant's eyes. The Taylor gang. They've hit 3 other groups in the past month. Been tracking them, but they know the territory better than we do. He turned to his men. We'll make camp here tonight. If that's agreeable to you, sir? This last was directed at Mr. Olson, who nodded his consent. As the soldiers dismounted and began setting up their camp, the lieutenant took statements from Zara and Griffin about the attack. He was particularly interested in the direction the bandits had taken after the robbery. They've got a hideout somewhere in the Black Hills, he explained. Been trying to pinpoint it for months. What are the chances of recovering any of the stolen property? Zara asked. The lieutenant's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Slim, miss. Even if we catch them, most of what they take gets spent or sold quickly. But we'll do our best. That night, after a meal shared with the soldiers, Zara found herself unable to sleep. She slipped outside, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the chill night air. The soldiers' camp was quiet, with just a single sentry visible in the moonlight. She was startled to find Griffin already sitting on the porch steps, smoking a cigarette. He shifted to make room for her, and she sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. She shook her head. Too much on my mind. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, Zara spoke. I've been thinking about your offer. Griffin kept his gaze on the distant horizon. And it's generous. More than generous. But I can't accept it. He turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Why not? Zara struggled to find the right words. Because it would be under false pretenses. You deserve someone who comes to you freely, not out of desperation or gratitude. Is that what you think I'm asking for? Gratitude, isn't it? She looked at him directly now. You saved my life, my mother's, my brother's. You've given us everything and asked for nothing in return. Why would you want us at your ranch if not out of some sense of obligation to see us safe? Griffin was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. From the moment I found you under that wagon, something changed for me. I've been alone a long time, Zara. Too long. Watching you with your family, seeing how fiercely you love them, how you fought for them. It woke something in me I thought was dead and buried. He looked away, as if embarrassed by his own words. I don't expect you to feel the same. God knows you've been through hell. But don't mistake my offer for charity. Zara's heart raced as she absorbed his words. Before she could respond, the sentry called out a warning, and both of them stood as one of the soldiers came running toward the house. Lieutenant says to get inside, the young man panted. Riders approaching from the east. Might be the Taylor gang. Griffin was already moving, heading for the barn where his rifle was stored. Get your mother and Simon to the cellar, he told Zara. Stay there until I come for you. The next hour passed in tense silence. Zara huddled with her family and the Olsons in the root cellar beneath the house, listening to the muffled sounds of men positioning themselves outside. Occasionally, she could hear Griffin's voice giving instructions, apparently having been accepted as an ally by the soldiers. When gunfire erupted, Hannah pulled Simon close, covering his ears as the boy trembled in fear. Zara found herself praying, something she hadn't done with any real conviction since the attack on their wagon. "Please," she whispered. "Not again. Not him." The firefight was brief but intense. When silence finally fell, they waited anxiously for some sign that it was safe to emerge. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the cellar door opened, and Griffin's face appeared in the opening. "It's over," he said, his expression grim. "Taylor and 2 of his men are dead. 1 got away." Zara climbed the ladder quickly, her eyes scanning Griffin for injuries. There was blood on his shirt sleeve, and she gasped. "It's not mine," he assured her. "One of the soldiers took a bullet. Lieutenant's patching him up now." Outside, the bodies of the bandits lay covered with blankets, waiting to be buried at first light. The lieutenant was indeed tending to a young soldier with a shoulder wound not unlike Zara's, while the rest of the men secured the bandits' horses and weapons. "Found this," the lieutenant said when he saw Zara, holding out a leather pouch. "Recognize the description you gave of your father's wallet. Money's mostly gone, but there are some papers inside that might be important to you." Zara took the pouch with trembling hands. Inside were her father's carefully preserved discharge papers from his brief service in the Mexican-American War, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, and a folded document that proved to be the deed to a small piece of land near Helena, her father's dream, the reason for their journey west. "He did it," she whispered, showing the deed to her mother who had followed her up from the cellar. "He bought the land before we even left Philadelphia." Hannah touched the document reverently. "He always was a careful planner. Wanted to make sure we had something waiting for us." Her voice broke. "Oh, John." The lieutenant approached, hat in hand. "Madam, miss, we'll be escorting you to Bitter Creek when you're ready to travel. From there, the railroad can take you on to Helena. Army will cover the cost, considering the circumstances." Zara looked at Griffin, who stood slightly apart, his expression carefully neutral. He nodded once, a gesture of understanding, then turned and walked toward the barn. She found him there an hour later, after the excitement had died down and plans had been made for departure the following day. He was saddling his horse, his movements efficient and purposeful. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "No reason to stay now," he replied without looking at her. "Army will see you safely to Bitter Creek. From there, you can start your new life in Helena." Griffin, his name on her lips made him pause. "Look at me." When he turned, his face was composed, but his eyes betrayed him pain and resignation warred there, along with something deeper that made her breath catch. "Ask me again," she said softly. "Ask me to come with you." Confusion crossed his features. "You have your mother's land now. A future in Helena. Land means nothing without the right people to share it with," Zara replied, taking a step closer to him. "These past days have shown me what truly matters. Mother and Simon are my family, yes. But you." She faltered, then gathered her courage. "You've become something else to me. Something I wasn't looking for but can't imagine being without now." Hope dawned slowly in Griffin's eyes. "What about your mother?" "Simon, I've spoken with Mother. The Army will escort them to Helena, help them get settled. Once she's recovered fully, once we've built something at your ranch." Zara smiled tentatively. "They'll join us, if that's still what you want." Griffin closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "It's what I want more than anything," he whispered, before lowering his lips to hers. The kiss was sweet and tender, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Zara saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. "I still don't understand why you saved me that day," she confessed. "Why you chose to help a stranger when most would have ridden past." Griffin's thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "Maybe I wasn't just saving you. Maybe, without knowing it, I was saving myself too." 3 weeks later, Zara stood on the porch of Griffin's ranch house, watching as he worked with Simon in the corral, teaching the boy how to gentle a skittish colt. The afternoon sun gilded everything with warm light, from the rolling grasslands to the distant mountains that framed the valley. The ranch was larger than she'd imagined, with a sturdy two-story house, a barn, bunkhouse for the hands Griffin hired during busy seasons, and several corrals. The cattle, nearly 200 head, grazed on the lush grass of the valley floor. Inside, she had spent the past weeks turning the house into a home. Griffin had built the place with his own hands, but had never bothered much with comforts. Now, curtains hung at the windows, rag rugs covered the wooden floors, and flowers from the prairie brightened the rooms. A rider appeared on the horizon, and Zara shaded her eyes to see better. It was Charlie, the young cowhand Griffin employed year-round, returning from his weekly trip to town for supplies and mail. "Letter for you, Mrs. Stanton," Charlie called as he dismounted, handing her an envelope bearing her mother's handwriting. The name still gave her a small thrill. She and Griffin had been married by a traveling preacher just days after arriving at the ranch, a simple ceremony with only Charlie and his wife Lucy as witnesses. It had been Griffin's idea to send for the preacher, but Zara had agreed readily. There seemed no reason to wait when both were so certain. She opened the letter eagerly. Hannah wrote that she was fully recovered now and had sold the land near Helena at a tidy profit, thanks to the railroad's expansion, and was using the money to open a small bakery in town. Simon was enrolled in the local school, but counted the days until summer when he could join them at the ranch. "Good news?" Griffin asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Zara leaned back against his solid warmth. "The best. They're thriving in Helena. Mother's business is doing well, and Simon is actually attending school regularly, much to everyone's surprise." Griffin chuckled. "He'll make a fine rancher one day, if that's what he wants. Boy has a natural way with animals. Like his brother-in-law," Zara said, turning in his arms to face him. The sun had bronzed his skin and lightened streaks in his dark hair, but it was his eyes that captivated her, warm brown with flecks of gold, always looking at her as if she were a miracle he'd stumbled upon. "I have news too," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. His eyebrows rose in question. "Dr. Mitchell confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have a baby, come spring." Joy and wonder transformed Griffin's face. He lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, spinning her once before setting her carefully back down. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Zara nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "I never thought I could be this happy again. After the attack, after losing father, I felt like my life was over, that I didn't deserve another chance." Griffin's expression softened, and he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Remember what I told you that first night? You don't get to decide that. Some things are just gifts, plain and simple. Our job is to accept them with gratitude." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zara stood in the circle of her husband's arms, watching as the first stars appeared. She thought of the long journey that had brought her here, the tragedy, the pain, the unexpected joy of finding love when she least expected it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for saving me right back." 5 years later, the Stanton Ranch had nearly doubled in size. New buildings dotted the property, including a small schoolhouse where Hannah Jenkins now taught not only her grandchildren, but also the children of neighboring ranchers and Griffin's hired hands. Zara stood at the stove in the ranch house kitchen, stirring a pot of stew while keeping an eye on 3-year-old John, named for her father, who was busily arranging wooden blocks on the floor. Outside, she could hear the laughter of her 4-year-old daughter, Grace, who was undoubtedly following her father around the barn as he completed his evening chores. A familiar bark announced the arrival of Ranger, the cattle dog that had appointed himself guardian of the children, particularly the newest addition to the family. The dog trotted into the kitchen, checking first on John before settling beside the cradle where 2-month-old Sarah slept peacefully. The door opened, admitting a blast of autumn air along with Grace, her dark hair escaping from its braids and her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama, Uncle Simon's coming." Papa saw him from the ridge. Zara's heart lifted at the news. Her brother, now 17 and nearly as tall as Griffin, had been away for 2 months, helping drive cattle to the railroad at Cheyenne. It had been his first time making the journey without Griffin's supervision, a sign of the trust her husband placed in the young man who had become like a son to him. "Well then," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. We'd better set another place for supper. Can you help me with the plates, Grace? By the time Griffin arrived, stomping snow from his boots in the entryway, the table was set and the house filled with delicious aromas. He greeted Zara with a kiss, swung John up into his arms, and peered into the cradle at his sleeping daughter. Simon's about 10 minutes behind me, he reported. Stopped to check on that new colt in the south pasture. Says he has news. Zara raised an eyebrow. Good news, I hope? Griffin's eyes twinkled. Seemed mighty pleased with himself, so I'd wager yes. When Simon burst through the door moments later, his face confirmed Griffin's assessment. After hugging Zara and being mobbed by his niece and nephew, he proudly announced that he had been offered a partnership in a horse breeding operation near Laramie. The Crawfords were impressed with our stock, he explained over supper, referring to the family who had purchased several of Griffin's horses the previous spring. Said I have an eye for good horse flesh and offered me 20% of the business to start, with the opportunity to increase my share as the operation grows. Hannah, who had joined them for the meal as she did most evenings, beamed with pride. Your father would be so proud of you, Simon. Of all of you, she added, including Zara and Griffin in her gaze. Later that night, after the children were asleep and Simon had gone to his cabin on the property built for him, when he turned 16, Zara and Griffin sat on the porch swing, bundled against the cold, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been? Zara asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. If those bandits hadn't attacked our wagon? If you hadn't come along when you did? Griffin's arm tightened around her. Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at everything we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path. Zara nodded, understanding completely. The tragedy that had brought them together had shaped their lives, but hadn't defined them. Instead, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of loss of family, a home, a legacy. I still remember how you looked that first night, Griffin said softly. So fierce, so determined to save your family, even when you were wounded and frightened. He pressed a kiss to her hair. I think I started falling in love with you right then. Zara smiled, remembering her own words from that night. I don't deserve saving, she had whispered, convinced that her failure to protect her father meant she shouldn't be spared. And Griffin's reply, steady and certain, you don't get to decide that. Words that had changed everything. Words that had opened her heart to the possibility that life could offer second chances, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply to accept the gift of tomorrow. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dusting the world in silver, Zara turned her face up to her husband's. I love you, Griffin Stanton. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. His kiss was his answer, warm and sure, a promise renewed with each passing day. And as they returned to the warmth of their home, to the children sleeping peacefully within, Zara knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, not because fate had decreed it, but because they had chosen each other, again and again, through hardship and joy, building a love story that would be told for generations to come.